Now, in this session, we want to explore what are the trends, challenges, and opportunities for the future of science-informed policymaking. And just to give you a little bit of context for this session, our panelists, whom I'll introduce in just a moment, are academics and practitioners working in the field of science for policy. They're going to discuss the main challenges, the trends for evidence-informed policymaking and scientific advice in Europe. We're going to talk about how to explore opportunities to further develop S4P, and time permitting, we're also hoping to discuss how to develop connections and promote interactions between the three S4P communities. They're the scientists, the boundary organizations, and the policymakers. Now, as you heard from Joanna earlier, she talked about the Foresight report on science for policy, which has just been completed, and we are now going to hear a very brief overview of that report, and then we will have a question and answer with our panelists after that. By the way, we will be taking your questions during the session, so for those of you here in the room, we'll have roving mics. For those of you online, you can pose your question through Slido. Please feel free to put a question in, and I will ask the questions through Slido as well. If those of you in the room who prefer to use Slido, you can of course use Slido as well. Now, let me introduce our panelists, and then Leena will give us some of the key findings of the report. I'm going to move over here. So, Maria Leptin is the President of the European Research Council. Nicole Grobert is Chair of the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors, and she's Professor of Nanomaterials in the Department of Materials at the University of Oxford. Leena Sarvaranta is the lead of the Science for Policy Foresight Expert Group. And finally, Jolita Butkeviciene is Director for Innovation in Science and Policymaking at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, Innovation in Science and Policymaking. You're all very welcome. And Leena, if we can please have your overview of the Foresight report.
So good morning, everybody. Good to be here. I wonder if you are excited, but you bet I am. We did a foresight exercise, and then we pressed it into 30 pages. And now, in my 5 minutes, I will fly you over some big issues that we came across in the foresight process based on 5 scenarios. They are issues that we think that are pertinent to the discussion of a European science for policy ecosystem. And why did we pick up the 5 scenarios? I would like to remind that we were not to get the scenarios right per se, but we wanted to focus on possible situations in 2030, which in practice is already now. You surely can use much more imagination if you are preparing a scenario focusing on 2050 or beyond. Good. Then there is something called the tyranny of today. It should be about systems thinking, but we are all affected by our assumptions and biases, and we are attracted by ideas that we are familiar with, and it's really very hard to do out-of-the-box thinking. Even we keep on talking about it, and it is challenging to give urgency and space for things that are not yet that urgent today. So by science for policy, we mean practices and processes by which information should be exchanged between knowledge actors and policymakers with the intention to produce scientifically informed policies. Taking our imperfect knowledge and understanding as a given, we see 5 very important trends in R&I policy that shape the opportunities and challenges for the future of science for policy. Societal challenges driven and mission-oriented research and policy. This is a strong trend that aims at making research more impactful in solving societal problems. It provides a very amenable context for science advice, but it is also entailing some risks for science. Participatory science, citizen science, and policy support is a tendency to increase engagement of public and participation in science and science policy. This trend is constantly under construction, meaning that it is unfolding and increasing, but we have not yet seen where it will take us. Anyhow, mobilizing crowds has implications for how to promote science and how to promote scientific advice. Data enthusiasm and artificial intelligence taking over the scientific policy advice. This is a thing we see as a risk in science and in policy as well. There is this trend for data to replace reality as the object of conversation. And we should ask whether technology can be neutral, and we should ask whether science can be normative, or scientific advice can be normative. Open science and policy support. Open science is seen as a means of increasing the efficiency and productivity of research and public research expenditure. But open science is not the same as open scientific advice. It has characteristics of a protected space where also unpopular but well-founded opinions and views can be voiced. Then we have this policy-based evidence-making in incumbent-driven industrial policy. This scenario puts increased weight on advice mechanisms within and embedding data and evidence and experimentation within government agencies and government research and regulatory organizations. By going down the rabbit holes of these 5 scenarios, 5 trends, we came to 3 recommendations for the construction or development of an EU science for policy ecosystem. First, as to the ecosystem and advice mechanisms, we should evaluate what is there, structures, institutions, systems, etc., and think about how to open it. Deliberative policy-making mechanisms and coordination of policy mixes becomes important. We should experiment with different modes of incorporating scientific evidence, especially try new governance processes as pushed by the EU missions, or new institutionalized advice structures, or ask individual scientists to identify any known risks with following their advice. We should embrace and strengthen responsibility. This means being sensitive to values in policy and sensitive of values in science and how they inform judgment. We should embrace confrontation, and we should allow scientific advice to question policy goals. And also we should allow policymakers to question scientific knowledge. Science advice to policy must be about speaking truth to power. This is the one value that our European science and science for policy ecosystem must pursue uncompromisingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leena. You can just take a seat back in the panel. We already have questions coming in, so please do keep your questions coming in because there are already some very interesting points being made. Okay, Leena, thank you again for, first of all, being able to synopsize a very significant report in just one slide. That's a challenge. And secondly, of course, for the work that was done in compiling the report. Let's get reaction to it from our panelists now, because as I said, they have actually read the whole report. Maria Leptin, you're very welcome, President of the European Research Council. What were your views about the Foresight report? And be frank, I mean, it doesn't have to be flattering, complimentary reaction if you feel, you know, there are points that you'd like to make.
Well, I think it's impressive. And what you can clearly see here is that intelligent and insightful minds have put the report together, and I really welcome it. I actually also welcome this conference, which is very timely, I think, and I think it's the first of its kind, so that's a good thing too. The report has covered a lot. And I think it is trying to really think about the future, and as we all know, that's hard. So maybe I should say a little bit about the entire question of science to policy from the ERC point. Obviously, as the ERC president, I represent the ERC and its mission to support fundamental science. And, you know, researcher-driven, curiosity-driven science, which is, of course, the starting point of science for policy, and but also illustrates the value of science for itself. For example, this week's Nobel Prizes in physics, 2 of the 3, Lullier and Krauss, were ERC grantees. But I want to use another example that illustrates the difficulty of science, fundamental science, which we actually prefer to call frontier science, and I'll get to the reason why in a moment. Science, innovation, and policy. And that is another Nobel Prize, that of Katalin Karikó and Drew Weissman last week, who got their Nobel Prize for their insights in how RNA can be modified in order to make it non-immunogenic and long-lived. And they're always, I mean, at least Karikó, I can say this less about Weissman. What I want to say is we need all kinds of science. And Karikó's work is always said, you see, that's the value of absolutely curiosity-driven fundamental science. Actually, she was not doing fundamental curiosity-driven science. She was deliberately looking at how one can modify RNA for this technical purpose. So it was not fundamental curiosity-driven blue sky ivory tower. It was very directed towards innovation. What it was, however, was researcher-driven. It was not top-down policy-driven. And that is seen by the fact that she didn't get funding, she didn't get tenure. So I think this difference is really very important. Frontier science, fundamental frontier science, and top-down science. It has to be researcher-driven, it has to be bottom-up. And there was another point I wanted to make about this. Yes, Foresight, of course, Foresight. That's exactly what wasn't there. She did ultra-valuable work, as we now know, more than 20 years later. She was not funded. So the foresight was entirely missing. Do I blame anyone? No, of course not. It could not be foreseen. And interestingly, she doesn't blame anyone either. So I think these are my thoughts about fundamental science, frontier science, researcher-driven science, and foresight.
And when this may be a question I should have put at the very beginning. When one talks about science, what is science?
Okay, so first of all, we've got to distinguish science and research. Science in the Germanic languages is Wissenschaft, which is basically scholarship and research in all fields. And of course, the ERC funds that, including politics, policy, philosophy, social sciences, which all contribute to what we're talking about today. So what was your question? What is science?
What is the definition of science?
What is research? Research is uncovering the truth about how the world works. And I think that's ultra important. And it is, we don't, by definition, we don't know the outcomes because we're doing frontier research where knowledge of what we might discover is not there. And we need that. We need that because we don't know what challenges will hit us tomorrow. Of course, we know today that we have a problem with the climate, that we have food shortage, or at least food distribution problems in the world. So there again is not for the natural sciences, but for the social sciences to deal with. So we know the problems we face today, but we can't predict the problems that will hit us in 5, 10, 20 years' time.
And this is where foresight is very important, obviously.
Yeah, well, this is where foresight can't do much. We just have to let researchers whose research at the forefront of science on interesting problems that they recognize as interesting and important, and we, the rest of us, can't. I couldn't, I didn't know 20 years ago, although I work in the field, that what she was doing would be so valuable today. We have to let them follow their intuition, their insight. And the best the rest of us can do is to be alert and to listen. And I think that'll come up later in this and relates a lot to your 5 areas, the listening.
Okay, very good. Maria, thank you for that. Nicole Grobert, what's your reaction to the Foresight report?
Hello. Yep. Thank you for having me here today. It's a most exciting conference. And before I answer that question about the report, I'd like to pick up on the word science and the question, what is science? And Maria's comment about the translation of science in German, Wissenschaft. It's a long word, but it's quite a sensible word because Wissenschaft means Wissen is knowledge and Schaft is to create knowledge. And I think this report actually has done a tremendous job in bringing together the knowledge that currently exists and spicing it with a few ideas in terms of looking into the future. And Maria said, we can't predict the future. We have to create knowledge to understand what's happening. And this brings in the time factor. How much time have we got to create knowledge? And how sensible is this knowledge? How reliable is it? And what is the certainty or uncertainty that we can express and explain this knowledge to the policymakers? The more time we have, 20 years of research, there is a certain outcome where we can pretty convincingly say this is going to be happening or this is not going to be happening. We can say what we know, what we don't know, or what we may never be, what never may be known. If we don't have time, this balance between knowledge or I'm lacking the word now.
And the emergency or the need to
so
get...
we have the emergency case and we have the non-emergency case.
Yeah.
But what's the probability that we are right in our predictions is higher when we have more time to gather the evidence, gather the knowledge, create the knowledge. The less time we have, the higher the chances are that we're wrong. And this is when scientists have to stand up to the media and say, this is what we think, and then they're wrong because they didn't have enough time to create that knowledge.
Which was the issue about COVID, which came up this morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'd like to also go back to fundamental research versus applied research. One can't live without the other. One inspires the other. One feeds the other. So like we have a policy ecosystem, we also have a research, science, and creating knowledge ecosystem that needs to live alongside each other and exchange thoughts and ideas. Joanna Drake earlier had this vision that students from the sciences, the hard sciences and the soft sciences, policy-engaged students should meet and brainstorm. I'm maybe jumping the gun here. My vision is that we should start in kindergarten, when kids are most curious. They are doing science all day long. They're learning all day long, and it's fun. if we help them to understand that by creating this knowledge and understanding their environment, that they can convince their peers why it's maybe more fun to play in the sandbox than it's going up and down the slide because you hurt yourself less or something like that, there is evidence, then it will become quite natural also later at the university, or I'm taking myself as an example. I'm a researcher at heart. I get most excited in the lab when I can be in my ivory tower and leave me alone. I just want to know how this damn thing works. But at the same time, I entered this path of engaging with science for policy, and I'm enjoying it too. It's a different excitement that I'm getting there. But I'm not trained. It took me 5 years at least to understand what policymakers need, and I'm still learning every day when I communicate with the SAM Secretariat. So this ecosystem within the science advice mechanism, where we have scientists like me, 7 science advisors, with different backgrounds. We have the SAM Secretariat, who is our link to the Commission, and we have SAPEA, the science advice of all European academies, the hardcore scientists, where all the experts sit with the evidence that they gather for us to come up with recommendations for the Commission. Coming up with recommendations makes only sense if you know what the question is that is being asked. So we need to liaise closely with the Commission, but also need to stay independent, not to be too biased.
Stay independent and not be too biased, yes, because this is very important, isn't it?
Bias is
how do you prevent that? How do you retain your independence? That, you know, whether it's a policy maker, a politician, a government, or a corporation or whatever, leans on you, sponsors, whatever it might be.
No, that's not happening. So, the way SAM is set up is quite unique in the sense that we have the experts, well over 100 academies with scientific experts in a given field. We have the 7 science advisors who have different backgrounds in the social sciences and the physical sciences, but are not necessarily experts in a given field. So that removes some bias, but we're scientifically or academically literate to understand what the experts say. And then we're liaising with the SAM Secretariat. Although they sit within the Commission, they are not the commissioners themselves. So we're not directly engaging with the policymakers, but we hear from the Commission what the needs are. And there is a mutual exchange, but it's not a direct contact, which I think is quite important. So understanding what the needs are, but not going for a pint and talking.
Okay, that's interesting. It'd be very interesting to get people's views on that. Thank you very much, Nicole. Jolita, let's go to you because from European Commission's perspective, you're the Director for Innovation in Science and Policymaking at the Commission's Joint Research Centre, Innovation in Science and Policymaking. The Foresight report, maybe just your comments generally. I don't know whether you want to critique it as such or whether you want to say how it's going to be used or how it might inform what the Commission is going to do in terms of S4P.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning again to everyone. I was listening, and it's quite inspiring, and I was arguing with all of you. But before I will do that over the coffee afterwards, I will respond to your invitation. But first of all, thank Leena for the work you've done in delivering the report. In the Commission, we are a center of gravity working on Foresight. So I understand very well what kind of a process you had to go through. The 2030 is very close. So this is something, and I think the reflection that you made, that it's very difficult to get out of this biases, and it really gives you little freedom for creative thinking, is exactly that. However, developing the scenarios will be directly applicable for us to reflect how we reposition, how we take our work forward. So, and here I'm speaking on behalf of as you call them, boundary organizations. I always thought I'm mainstream, but I founded myself on the fringes. Fair enough. So, Joint Research Center. So we are the ones that also play the role. And I very much appreciate how you basically try to see these key challenges that, be it organizations like mine or policymakers would face in this process, and these new technologies, artificial intelligence, all these trends in the policymaking, society, misinformation, geopolitical tensions, which are not getting less, all these things find their way into your report, and I think we all need to somehow take them into account. Otherwise, we are missing on the reality check. And in fact, we have certainly been working, as I say, we're being a center of gravity for Foresight in the Commission. We are trying to see how these trends, how different observations that we see, these novel insights, we could figure them into our work. Well, Foresight will not give you the solution for the next mRNA, but it may prepare the system, be more resilient, more robust, and to respond better when the opportunity arises. And that's, I think, the value of your report. And if you could just allow me 3 remarks in reflecting. And the first would be, I would come not from the science, but from the policymaker's perspective, from the administration. And what is extremely important, we don't really think about it. Whatever these tectonic shifts that science brings, they need to find their way, one way or another, into the policymaking. And it is a process. You need to invest time, and you need to prepare the system to be ready, robust, to absorb. And this is the process that requires investment, and it's an art and science in itself, and we need to recognize. If you don't, the best science you have, it is not timely, it's not gonna make it, right? We know it. If you don't have those who are receiving on the other end, is not gonna make it. So if you have crème de la crème, the best data scientists going to work for KPMGs of the world, you're not gonna have them in the government. And I'm sure the situation is not getting better with what we are facing today in terms of artificial intelligence, and definitely the needs for us from the regulatory perspective to understand the processes and to respond. As you rightly recognize geopolitical shifts, you see the trends in the political sphere which are not easy. These are, weaker, more fragmented, more balanced governments, and they need to deliver on the promises on which they come, and the administrations have to follow. So how do you bring the soundest scientific advice in this fragile context? So my point that I'm trying to make is the process that we need to recognize, and the basis on this policy advice, how we can basically bring something that could really land. Now, second remark, if I may, so what do places like Joint Research Center, the so-called boundary organizations, do we play a role? We have to ask ourselves to be relevant, right? And I strongly believe that I think your presence here, in a way, is a discovery, because what we deliver is, we deliver the narratives. And with your insights, we also deliver different narratives of the future. We don't deliver different futures. I hope we could, we don't. But we deliver different narratives. And we, as science policy boundary actors, we can really write them up. We can really reflect how, using the scenarios, how we can make them actionable, how we can land, how we can position in responding to artificial intelligence, or responding how we use this plurality of knowledge and bringing them into the science. Because we are still having, we all recognize the importance of multi-interdisciplinarity, but we always work in the silo approach, and all of us are dealing with this. We all recognize the importance, as you said, of bringing in social sciences dimension, but we struggle because we don't know at which point, where. So the question is how, and I think the organization like ours could really engage citizens and ensure that we have this appropriation, this ownership, as you said, in the process, and deliver this plurality of knowledge into science for policy practices. So I strongly believe that we can influence this transformational process, and we can really be, we have agency in this. It's not that we are on the taker's side. And my final remark, let's not forget these deep interlinkages between science and democracy, and I very much appreciate you recognizing it. we understand this, of course, this, what you mentioned being critical, scientific being critical, you know, with the media as we have them, it's very easy to be critical. You don't need to be scientific to be critical and critical of the policymakers taking decisions in different areas. And my most recent example is what you know, Fukushima waters, you know, what Japan had to face with purely sound scientific advice, and it didn't work. Right, so it demonstrates that you have to ensure there's interlinkages, how to engage, and it's not a given. And I think you recognize this tension. I think we can still reflect how we can ensure if we have trust in science, right, so scientists are right, why this trust is evaporating when we are talking about the governments. Why we see these two kind of dichotomy or two diverse trends in vis-a-vis the governments and the science. Can we do something about this? Can we bring more scientists closer and engage in the political debate? Not the good actors, right? We do recognize political as a profession, I guess. But can we overcome this growing gap? So without further ado, I will close with these questions, because I think I already exceeded your allotted time.
Well, that's okay. Very, very good points. And they're actually reflected in some of the questions that are coming in. If you don't mind, I might take one or two of the Slido questions, and then I'll reach out to those of you here in the room. But there was a question that came in early on, and it speaks to the several points made during this panel and earlier this morning from Dr. Antonio Haider. Thank you for your question, Antonio. Should researchers be trained for policy dissemination, or should multidisciplinary teams be built instead? Which would be more impactful? Maria?
Yes, I think Nicole will want to respond to that one too. I think there are different kinds of researchers. Researchers are the top leading frontline researchers are selected throughout their careers for doing frontline, original, insightful, difficult, bloody hard, trying to understand research. Some of them are also good communicators or good people who are interested in talking to policymakers or to the press or to the general public. I think they should be trained. Everyone should learn what it takes, should learn to understand, not as long as not everybody is made to do it. There is a self-selection of those who take on jobs like we do here, and others don't. I think training helps, as long as we don't expect every researcher to be a good communicator. Conversely, I think it's extremely important to get professional communicators closer to science, closer to the research. And in fact, the ERC has put out a little program last year and has selected a recipient for a fund to train communicators, journalists, to give them better access to research. I think that's important. The general public, Nicole said, we have to start in kindergarten to learn, to get people to understand the scientific method. So yes, 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 more training is good, but really a researcher who's incapable of communicating their research may still be doing very, very good work. And I actually want to pass on a question, if I may, that relates very, very strongly to Nicole. And that is, we heard, what does it, we need better communication between, more open channels, better understanding between the scientists, the researchers, and policymakers. We have the SAM here. And my question to you would be, though you may not want to answer this here, but then over a beer later on, as you said, do you actually get asked often enough? Is there sufficient interest from the political, from the policy side, to always ask the SAM, help, help, help? That would interest me, whether it's just on the side of the researchers that there aren't open channels, or whether it's also from the side of the policymakers and the politician that they could use more training in understanding scientists and wanting to hear from scientists.
Okay, very good. Well, Nicole, you might want to answer that question first, and then the question that was asked.
I need a beer first.
You're going to get that later.
Okay. How should I put it? So SAM was established in 2016, and SAM certainly is not the only body in the Commission that provides advice, and certainly shouldn't be the only body. But there are lots of institutions that are in the right place for the right job. SAM in the beginning had a hard time to get off the ground because it was not known. It was a new thing. It was strange.
Sorry, now, SAM is...
Sorry, the Science Advice Mechanism. That's what...
Oh, the mechanism. Right,
Maria
okay.
asked me for.
Yeah, okay.
It's actually probably since the pandemic. I'm looking here at people in the audience from the SAM Secretariat. I think it's probably since the pandemic when things really got going, and then now so many requests that we struggle to address them. And it's a lot of work. It's also the SAM Secretariat has a lot to do. So I think it needed to be recognized. I think the first output had to, there had to be some evidence that what we do is worth it. And there has been some impact. For example, the cancer screening scientific opinion led straight into the policy making. So, and there are other examples too that really made a difference. But again, SAM is one building block in this entire ecosystem. The JRC, for example, had produced a very interesting tool where you can check what sort of, what role you could play as a scientist in policy making, science for policy making. And I clicked on this the other day thinking I should take that test and see. But since it was personalized, I didn't dare. I will do it after the conference to see if I'm still allowed to sit in my role where I am now.
But in answer to the first question, well, it's gone now, but about improving well, actually,
I didn't answer the question. I'm so sorry. Did I?
Well, yeah, but actually, why don't you answer Juliana Angelova's question from Health and Environment Alliance? What is, because it's kind of a similar type of a question, what is an efficient way to communicate with EC reps and policymakers to facilitate the uptake of scientific research? Researchers in EC speak differently.
First and foremost, you need to listen.
Who needs to listen? The researchers?
Both sides. So the policymakers need to explain what they need. The researchers need to understand what the needs are. And vice versa, the policymakers also need to understand what the boundary conditions within the scientists or researchers' work, where our own limits and what we can produce in a given time or the time that is available. And that's where we need to communicate the uncertainty, and we need to learn to understand each other's languages. That's true not only between the policymakers and the scientists, but it's also in interdisciplinary teams. There was a question earlier, shall we build these interdisciplinary teams? We could, but it's not easy. Because even a physicist and a chemist and a biologist, they speak different languages and they need to learn. If you bring in another dimension of the social scientists, it's tough, but doable, challenging, and fun.
Okay, very good. Let's take some questions from the audience. Now, I've been asked if you can stand up. Yes, okay. Lady over here, if we can get a microphone to the person standing up, please. That's great. I think they want you to stand up probably for the cameras. And if there's anyone on the panel in particular you'd like to get your answer from. You're ready to go. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Sarani. I'm coming from Malaysia. I'm a trained science communicator, since there's like a lot of discussion on communication going on here. So being a science communicator, yes, I'm very interested to communicate science to the public, to the policymaker, to the scientists. But from my perspective, what I can see is science communicator, we are not really being included in the decision-making process. We are always being a bit outside. And it's very difficult for us to communicate. And we are not being in the middle to facilitate the communication process. So this is the challenge that we are facing as a trained science communicator, I hope. I just wanted to put this in for discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you mind my asking where do you work, just to give us a context of
Okay.
how you're not
Yes,
included.
okay.
Yeah.
I am working in a Malaysian Biotechnology Information Center, and I'm a science journalist too. We have our own Malaysian science newspaper called The Petri Dish. So this is how we communicate science in Malaysia and also globally. Our parent company is in Philippines. Yeah, so our parent company, we are more focused into communicating agri-biotech. But our Malaysian Biotech Center, we focus on all sciences, including climate change and also other topics, and also
Okay.
policy.
And when you say you're not being included, is it the government of Malaysia? Is it university institutions? Can you give us a sense of
Yes.
who isn't including
Okay,
you?
it's everywhere, including the university and also the government. Like, okay, you see, like being a science journalist, every time I will interview scientists to bring out their research, you know, because I can write it in a more layman language, so I can reduce the jargon so that, you know, making it more newsworthy. So that is what I do. But when it comes to the decision making thing, we are not included. We don't have that access to put in, you know, because when we are in the ground, we know what public think, you know, we know what researchers think, but there's no platform for us to give that input,
No platform.
to influence the decision making.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll take one more question if there is, and then we'll get our panelists' comments on that particular dilemma. I don't know who was, oh, this lady here. Okay, I think you were second. We'll try to get back to you. Yes, okay, thank you.
Hi there, my name's Arlene Holmes-Henderson. I'm Professor of Classics Education and Public Policy at Durham University in the UK. My question for the panel is, what can arts and humanities researchers do to share their research with policymakers? We also count as scientists, I think, in the broadest sense, but the way in which we inform policy thinking might be a bit different to others. So it'd be great to hear your responses to that question.
Okay, and you're Arlene Holmes, who put the question.
I am, yeah.
You made sure that...
Yeah, in the room, but also online.
No, very good, because your question got a little bit of support. Okay, let's take the question from the lady from Malaysia first. And because not only is she in the science area, but she's a science journalist, so clearly can articulate what is happening, but doesn't feel she is getting, or her community is able to play a role in policy making. Jolita, do you want to take that first, perhaps?
I don't really take it as a question. I think it was more of a statement. And I do believe, I think it's a general, basically, how we treat communication. Is communication something you deliver at the end, or communication you start and build all along? I think it's a general statement, and of course we all agree.
And Leena, I haven't brought you in yet. Do you want to comment on that, or?
Maybe if I just make another statement, what we did miss in our Foresight exercise, we did not ask about the thing that governments are not only responding to what comes from the science, okay? It's important to understand that policymakers need to respond to what comes from industry and market. And then if we think about market, the citizens, all of us, can be the actors, market actors that can change the market demand. So this adds the complexity now. And we did not, in our Foresight exercise, we did not ask specifically how scientific advice relates to industry, stakeholders in industry, which are very heterogeneous, and stakeholders in the investment branch, because the future is the change is done by investment, and like financial and insurance institutions. So we have many stakeholders in the game. And as to the art, really, it's a very hard question, but I I wonder if you were thinking about knowledge generated by arts and humanities, or research output, research results, and so on. So it's about the channels, existing channels, and these are the things that we actually, when we are discussing building the ecosystems for scientific advice, or let's say knowledge-based decision making, however you want to put it, I think we need to go into that and see what we have there and how to make it better. But certainly I would love to see, I challenge you now, when we look at the huge amount of forward-looking research projects within Horizon Europe, I would like to see consortia where you have the artificial intelligence guys together with philosophers and art and humanities. So try to get there. That's the fastest channel, I suppose. I don't know if you got my ideas, but we can continue.
That would be amazing. Maria, that comment perhaps, and the comment about Malaysia as well. And
about Malaysia, obviously.
But yeah, the
but
point about not being
the
consulted.
point,
Yeah.
being involved in decision making. I have to say, I don't think you should be involved in decision making. I shouldn't either as a scientist. I really think we've got to be clear about that. People who are involved in decision making are accountable to their voters or to their employers or whoever. I, as a researcher, am accountable to the truth and only the truth. I may get it wrong, and so whatever I report to politicians or policymakers may be wrong. That's in the nature of research. I do not think we should be involved in decision making. If we want to be, then go into science, go into policy, go into politics. And then you're accountable to those for whom you make decisions, namely the citizens who will have elected you if you live in a democracy, or to whoever employs you. So I really think we've got to get that separation absolutely straight. That's what went wrong with some of my colleagues at the beginning of COVID. They did it, I'm sure, with the best intentions, but we've got to be careful there. Decision-making is for elected politicians.
Arts and humanities, anything to add on that?
I think the same. I don't see any difference between arts and humanities and the rest of science. I mean, we, the natural scientists, because it's technology, because it's direct, it seems more direct. I think arts and humanities are extremely important. It is equally important to understand how the mind works, how societies work, how interpersonal relations work, how communication works. So I think it's all important. We got to talk, we got to get others to understand what we're doing, but I don't see a fundamental difference between what you do and what we do.
Okay, thank you. Nicole?
It's a question back to Arlene. What have you tried? How did you make contact to policymakers? Have you tried anything?
Can we have a mic to Arlene? Yeah, thank you.
Because there are various schemes where...
There are schemes,
Yeah.
you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, and I actually used to work for Oxford, Nicole, so with help from the Oxford Policy Engagement Network, I've actually had a lot of success of sharing my classics research with policymakers. So I worked with the Department for Education in England and managed to unlock a £4 million investment in classics education for young people across the country. So it's definitely the case that people who have research in arts and humanities can be very successful, but I now chair the UPenn Subcommittee for Arts and Humanities, which is a brand new entrant to the university's policy engagement network in the UK. We're trying as a consortium of 120 universities to try and help arts and humanities researchers across the country to feel brave enough to start talking to policymakers, but it seems like it's something which isn't really on the radar of a lot of my arts and humanities colleagues. They feel like they don't have the language to do it yet, and they don't really have the channels of communication either. So I offer a lot of training, free training in the UK to help the arts and humanities research community do this, but I'm always looking for ideas from colleagues who might be able to help me spread the word.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you've got the answer yourself. Mind you, I mean, also for the natural sciences, is trial and error. In this, my case, it was learning by doing, unfortunately.
Okay. Did you want to comment on any other of the points made, or will we take some more questions?
I think they were covered.
Yeah, they were covered. I know there's a lady in blue. Can I just take one question from Slido, and then we're going to go to you? What about the second one here from an anonymous contributor? What is the role of non-science actors, experts, practitioners in co-producing knowledge for policy, and how do you mitigate against the risks of, for example, lobbying, power asymmetries? Nicole?
I think the answer to that is it's equally important, but we need tools to balance opinions and balance lobbyists. So by having more than one type of scientific advice, you can counteract any extreme views and provide evidence that, you know, what the balance view might be.
Okay. Let's take the lady in blue over here, and then we've got a question over here. I'm going to stand up to make sure that I can see.
So basically,
yes, okay, we'll take your question as well. I'm going to stand up now because sometimes it's hard to see the back of the room. I think it's on.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So my name is Sophie van Turnhout, and I've worked for ESAC, one of the academy networks in the SAM. I've worked for Anne Glover, and I've worked for Sense About Science, which is a campaigning organization promoting the use of evidence in public. So from that experience, I was triggered by the question I think asked by Jolita, or thinking about why is science trusted, why is it right, until when it comes to policy. And the problem is when it comes to policy, science isn't right and science isn't the truth, because it's never that simple. There's always a trade-off. If you look at COVID, there's an impact on physical health and there's an impact on mental health. And if you avoid people meeting, then you improve physical health. If you, then you improve physical health, but you have a bad effect on mental health. So you have a trade-off, and science can inform that debate, but it will not solve it. And I feel that is not acknowledged enough by the scientists, that they can only inform, but they cannot tell you what is the best decision, because there are these trade-offs. And I think that is what is still lacking in our debates about science for policy. It's really that acknowledgement. And I think trust would improve if you acknowledge that as a scientist.
But do you think that's right, that it should be, that's the way it should be? You inform, but you don't get involved in
There's just no right or wrong in politics, I think. There is just a trade-off of interests. And that is something, and scientists can tell you where the trade-off is, but they cannot help you decide which interests take prevalence over others. That's your political debate.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And when that is said, for all the people who've been asking what can I do as a scientist, go to Sense About Science. They give loads of support to scientists to involve at policymakers.
Okay, thank you. There was a gentleman here who had his hand up, and we'll take your comment then, and then we'll go back to our panelists. So, gentleman over here, would you mind standing up, please? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rupert Lewis from the Royal Society in the UK. Former science advisor in government and also former policymaker. I just want to comment, Maria, I think you made an incredibly important point about who is responsible for the decision. And it's not the scientist. And on your point earlier, often the answer is not consistent with the science because the policymaker needs to consider the economics, the risk, public acceptability, and so on. But Leena made a very important point, I think, in your description of scenarios, and that is scientists often need to challenge the question, are you asking me the right question? And I came to think of it as negotiating the question. The framing of the issue is really important and can change dramatically. Often policymakers are naive about the science and don't ask sensible questions. So in COVID, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to minimize the health impacts, minimize the impact on the health service? optimize the economy? Like negotiating that question is really important, and I think that's a critical role that scientists need to get used to if they're going to be good advisors.
Okay, very good point. Yes, and then we'll take your question. Yes, Nicole.
Hello,
Yes, you're on.
Could I just comment to that? The science advice mechanism has a phase that we call the scoping phase. And in this phase, the scientists or the advisors bounce the questions back and forth with the Commission to understand what the policy needs are, what the policy ecosystem is existing, and where the gaps are, and what they want to fill and how they want to fill it. So that's actually one of the most important phases in creating this the recommendations based on scientific evidence.
Okay, Maria, did you want to comment on that?
No, I would
Okay.
have said, can Nicole please answer that?
Yeah, okay, very good. Gentleman here, thank you.
Hi, I'm Nikos Kastrinos. I work in the Commission. My question is this.
I don't know if we have we got the mic on there? Can you just, oh yeah, now it's on, yes, yeah.
The other day, 1,600 scientists, including 2 Nobel Prize winners, signed an open letter where they said that there is no climate crisis.
Okay,
you hear me?
can you raise
Okay.
the mic? Sorry now to interrupt.
Okay.
Oh, here, okay. Can you say
rock
that
and roll.
again, what you
Yes.
just said?
Now, just the other day, 1,600 scientists, including 2 Nobel Prize winners, published an open letter in which they said that there is no climate crisis. Are they speaking the truth? Should they be trusted? Should they be taken seriously in policy? This is my question.
Is it fake news? 16, you said, signed this.
1,600.
What, 1,600?
1,600.
Okay.
No, it's not fake news. I actually saw the signatures.
Okay, I don't know what to do with that question. Nicole, what?
Well, I didn't pick up those news.
Okay.
But, well, if this is the case, it should be challenged. You can't, I mean, a claim like that, you can't just leave. You have to ask other opinions. You have to look for the evidence, and you should challenge it.
Oh, okay. Just very quickly. Yeah. No. We need a microphone so the online audience can hear you. If you could stand up, thanks very much.
So that's why it's a little bit strange. If those 1,600 people who signed the letter are not scientists by any definition, I refuse to consider them scientists if they, basically negate the evidence.
Okay.
I mean, it's again, we are going to burn Galileo again. I mean, come on, it's ridiculous. They're not scientists. They're not scientists, period. Send me their publication and we will decide.
Okay, brilliant. I don't want to get sidetracked here. We've only a few more minutes left. I want to take one more question from... Oh, did you have a point to make? Okay, very quickly. Thanks. Yeah.
It was actually a question.
You need to stand up so that... Yeah.
Alessandra Allegra from the European Commission, but also researching science advice. And I want to ask a question about tools and technologies and bring it back a little bit to the forward-looking. There has already been a mention of AI now here. And if we think about what we do when we do science advice, science for policy, is a lot of evidence review, literature searches, crunching, synthesizing, and then writing it up, basically. And anyone who has done a library search with an index card knows it's not the same as doing it with Google. And now, with the new technology that we have in terms of AI, but not only, how is it going to change the practice of science advice? So very practically, how do you think these new technology will have an impact on how we do science advice? And what do we need to take into account? And with some academic colleagues, we published a piece last week reflecting on some of these challenges, but also opportunities, because I mean, Nicole knows it very well. We spend so much time drafting. If we can cut that even by half by using some generative AI, then it's welcome. But what are the pitfalls and the things that we need to take into account?
Okay, who do you want to answer that question? Is that question for anybody in particular?
Well, it's a question, I think, for the whole panel. I can imagine that...
Okay, Maria, if we start off with you then. Yeah.
I think, great. If AI can do the first step of the work for you, I would use it. Obviously, ultimately, you have to check whether what ChatGPT or whoever you use comes back with is sound and solid. Challenge it if necessary, because we know that ChatGPT isn't perfect. It's called hallucinates. I understand that the top people think it should be confabulates, because it's different from hallucinating. So, and we, of course, as a funder, care a lot about that. We've put together a group within who advises our scientific council on how AI is going. But, you know, it's a tool, like you say. Google searches also don't give you the full truth. You always have to double check at the end. I think it should be used. We will probably allow it within bounds for referees, for reviewing, for doing initial sort of text smoothing, or perhaps even analysis. We have to learn to live with it. It's not going to go away, and we have to learn how to handle it. So I think it's great if it saves work, fantastic, as long as you double check in the end.
Okay, Nicole?
I think the key word here is training. I mean, I must admit, this Foresight report, fantastic, but I also got the shivers. I got the shivers when I read the using AI for evaluation of research proposals, and probably people will also use AI or ChatGPT or other tools to create research proposals. So we have to be careful that we're not completely removing the ideas that are generated in our heads. So we need to learn how to use these tools. We need to understand what the output is from these tools. And coincidentally, the Science Advice Mechanism, doing a bit of advertising here, we're looking into AI in research. So we're looking for evidence for the challenges and opportunities that AI may bring for research and the consequences associated with that.
Okay. Jolita, do you want to comment on any of the points that have been made so far? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I will not abuse the power of the last question, but just to say, certainly the speed and the change will be of a different scale than we have seen before, that we have to recognize. It's not the first time we're grappling with these type of issues. If I come from the policymakers' point of view, and I think that's what you, Leena, asked, is technology neutral? Yeah. That was your question. It's a question. Today, Alessandro, you know yourself, you know, chat or generative AI is at the B- level. It hasn't reached yet A levels, but we see all the potential there. What it will not deliver is what we are discussing today. So how we do make then the link between what it delivers and how it lands in the society. And for this, if I may just, to finish off, in GRC, we looked at the competency frameworks. It's certainly training and having the right people in the right places are important. We have to have competent policymakers, but also scientists to be able to talk to the policymakers, and we need structures. No matter how much training they will do, what you will do more trainings. And if we don't put in place structures by which the information flows and the decision is also made in this ecosystem, we will never move the needle.
Okay, one more question that's got a lot of thumbs up from Slido, from Tomasz Szwebocki. I probably butchered your name, Tomasz, so sorry, my apologies for that. Anyway, Tomasz wants to know, how can young scientists get involved in science policy during their academic career? Nicole?
You could join one of these young academies that exists in various member states. Also, there's a European Young Academy, or the Young Academy of Europe. Then there's a global Young Academy. If you join one of these, they're part of, for example, SAPEA, where you could take part in working groups. And yeah, you need to make the first step. People don't necessarily go and find you. If you want it, you can get it.
Okay. Let's just maybe some final questions very quickly to all of you. And Leena, I want to go back to you as a final to give us a final takeaway message. But maybe, Maria, what do you think is the most important challenge or opportunity when it comes to developing science for policy?
I think talking to each other, listening. Someone else said that very nicely, trying to understand the language, and also at an organizational level, talking to each other. I mean, I think we're doing that. So the ERC has a Science for Policy unit that looks at our portfolio, brings to the attention of the Commission what's new and exciting. We collaborate with the scientific advice mechanism, you know, at all levels. Talking to each other, recognizing each other's needs and limitations, and solving them. Events like this are obviously good.
Okay, Nicole, same question to you.
Luck.
Yeah.
Being open-minded and maybe reduce the competition a little bit. Just try to listen more than to speak.
When you say reducing competition, what do you mean?
Deciding on which is the better scientific advice. There is, for each building block in this ecosystem, there is a role to play. And we can, by teaming up and collaborating or crossing these intersections that Joanna Drake referred to, by smoothing them out with bridges or looking at these defects. Defects in the semiconductor industry, if it weren't for defects, we wouldn't have mobile phones, we wouldn't be sitting here talking in a microphone. Defects are also a good thing, or gaps are also a good thing. If you recognize them, you can address them. If you go blindfolded through the world, you can't make change.
Okay, thank you very much. Very insightful. Just before I go back to Leena, Jolita, back to you, I suppose, from a Commission's point of view, what's the key thing, do you think, the Commission needs to do now to develop these ecosystems? Joanna was talking a lot about that this morning, about the need to develop these ecosystems.
A lot of ideas spring to mind. Certainly, I believe that Commission has a role to play to begin with, because we do have a convening power. Commission also has this position of honest broker. We have also a standing of legitimacy in the advice. Commission can also offer the platform for exchanging best practices, experiences. You know, the question just you asked before basically tells us that we do not have the answer. So we don't know what is the answer. So we are all looking for the answers, and some answers work in some contexts, some not. But if we don't have a platform by which we come together to exchange these ideas and approaches, we will never move ahead. So I do believe that Commission can offer this platform for best practices, exchanging, reflecting. I also believe that we need to continue and support through different instruments, national partners, empowering at different levels, be it at the research, but also at the decision-making. And if I can also finish off by saying something which is, again, very commonsensical, and it was said, we need really spend time and effort to connect the dots. Connect the dots meaning connect different actors playing different roles. You have different actors sitting here. We need to really deepen and put mechanisms which ensure continuity. So if nice people go away, the efforts continue. So this needs to be not a best effort-based principle, but also connect the dots in the whole of the ecosystem, meaning, you know, if you think scientists, they can live without policymakers. You think policymakers, they can live without scientists. So how do we put the structures by which the two systems are not in isolation, but they talk? And as the Commission, we are very much interested in putting forward a comprehensive approach in the sense, we call it a portfolio approach, by which we want to bring every aspect of a problem on the table. So we want to have natural sciences, humanities, social sciences, all of them, and in putting arts into producing creativity. Basically, I think all of us can find space in that.
Okay, great. Maybe finally back to you, Leena, because you opened it up by giving us a synopsis of the Foresight report. How do you think Foresight can be used productively to advance the agenda, the ambition of having a very developed science for policy EU ecosystem?
I try to take the point of view of a decision maker. What do they need? And we think that strategic foresight can be very useful. And strategic foresight, it's not only based on visions or positive opportunities and preferred future. It's also based on threats, fears and risks. And we need to have imagination. Also, this topic, it's important because that helps us get prepared for future. We cannot plan the future, really. If we are in a known context, we can have tools and methodologies and roadmaps and plans and forecasts and prognosis and whatever, and they are all very useful. But we are not in reality, we are not in a known context as to the future. So there are so many nuts to crack. That's why it's easier to do it, the nut cracking, if we stay together, if we really work together and we are on the same side in the foresight process. And instead of just rather sticking to our own perceptions and old ideas and try to hide from unpleasant things, and that means that we have to be very tolerant with vagueness, and we should really embrace complexity and uncertainty. And of course, foresight has many problems. All of us, as I said, including decision makers, we rather have a tendency to be convinced with arguments that seem somehow match with our own experiences. And then also the images of futures are often built on very broad general level or from a very narrow point. So by having sort of a pluralistic approach, taking all the stakeholders on board somehow to be inclusive, I think we can come up with better preparedness for future